Hi, this is Kyle, and this is the video that's going to go along with the week 1 slides. This together with the lecture times will be pretty good. They'll supplement each other, though this is really the lecture content. Anyway, this first week's content is just about .NET development review in general. We won't even be looking closely at any code here, but that's okay because this first week's material, it's about being ready and making yourself very aware of every aspect of your course outline, which isn't covered here. So this may be dry, but I'll skip over the really painful parts. Here I would say it's useful to have an idea of what the Common Language Runtime is, and know that the .NET framework supports a number of languages. Why is that useful to know? Because in this course we'll be working fairly directly with at least 3 of those. It's neat to know that code can be integrated with classes and methods of managed code written in other languages, but that's a fairly advanced thing to do, and the number of times it would be useful is probably fairly small. It would be good for you to know what a namespace is, a section within the library that contains classes, structures, enumerations, delegates, interfaces. It's also neat to know that there is such a thing as the Microsoft Intermediate Language, although we won't be interacting with it directly in this course. The Microsoft Intermediate Language code is converted to native code using a just-in-time compiler. The idea here is that .NET code is relatively portable. Here it says programs can be written in any editor and then compiled with the VB compiler. This course is a .NET course, and we work a fair bit with Visual Studio, which is also just nice for myself as an instructor that it's consistent. It would be nice for us to consistently stick with Visual Studio, in my opinion. But if you need to write in Notepad++ in order to feel cool or indie or something, you can do that. Just know that if you need help in class, I'm probably going to be missing those debug features. We'll get to those Windows Presentation Foundation applications much later in this course. To distribute these applications, all you need is to post or send the exe file. And those of you familiar with the Visual Basic of the 90s would probably find that pretty exciting. If you need a place to put images and such, or maybe insert the NetD 3202 theme song, that type of thing would go in the resource folder. Okay, so now we're at the good part. We're lightly touching on object-oriented programming here, which we'll be doing much more later in the semester, and of course you're going to see it in other courses too. So an object is a self-contained unit that contains combined code and data. This includes forms and controls and a lot of other things, including objects we design based on classes we design later in the course. A class is the code that defines the characteristics of an object. You can think of it as a template if that helps. Or perhaps the class is a mold or a blueprint, and the object is each item created from that mold or blueprint. An object is an instance of the class. Creating an object from a class is called instantiation. More than one object can be created from a class. You'll hear this a lot in this program if you haven't already, but if there were a class called student, you could all be objects of the student class. There are several student objects, and they have their own values for properties, like grades and student numbers. But you do have certain shared characteristics, like limbs, maybe, mostly. Brains, that would be nice. Properties define the characteristics of an object, including the properties of form controls. Methods are the operations that an object can perform. Events are signals sent by an object to the application. And all of these things can be called members of an object. Multiple objects of the same class all have the same properties, methods, and events. The values assigned can differ, so all of the buttons in a Windows Form application have the same properties, they just would have different values for those properties, like different names for the button, etc. When you're building a Windows Forms application, the form designer is generating VB or C# code that creates a class. You design things visually, but Visual Studio is actually writing the code that describes that design. And you can see this and mess with it if you want to look at the .designer.vb file. Let's actually have a look at one of those. So here, for example, we've got a piece of code that was created in the designer view, and this is describing one single text box called text diameter. And so it's got a location, margin information, the name, the size, basically a little piece of code for every single property, including a tooltip. This is from a piece of code that I'll be demonstrating in another week. Here's a slide about viewing and setting assembly information. Next. So this ought to be a review from Prog 1205, and it's still important, and I'd love for you to spend a bit of time thinking about this and whether you've done this on any of your more recent projects. We'd like you to figure out the requirements first, plan and design all needed controls early, know the properties and methods of the controls, write pseudocode or a flowchart, and this is all prior to writing code, which is step 9 here. Unsurprisingly, there are going to be people who start their work in courses like this one without fully understanding the problem. In this course, we're not asking you to hand in planning documents, but I'd say it's still a good idea. And if your program doesn't work and you're not sure why, we, as instructors, reserve the right to ask to see how you plan things. A very good way to track your understanding of the requirements is to treat every exercise and lab handout as a checklist. Highlight everything that's a requirement in one color, and then check it off or highlight it in a different color as you complete that aspect of the assignment. Use a third color for things that you don't understand or need help with. The other thing you need to be ready is all of that delicious knowledge from your previous .NET development course. Chapters 1 to 10, or 1 to 5 at a minimum, will be very helpful. Review the style guide, as that's a part of how you'll be graded. Acting on this stuff now will have you ready for a very successful semester.